on and on.
Yeah, I don't either. And welcome in the audience. Welcome very much to Conversation. We have two guests for this program. We're going to be talking about issues relating to the mortgage crisis that's gripped the country this last year or two, and other matters having to do, I guess, keying off the sense among so many people across the world that's under the generic rubric of Wall Street, Occupy Wall Street, a general sense among much of the world's citizenry that something's amiss in need of big change in terms of the way we organize the human society. And let me introduce the guests. We're going to show a little roll-in tape and so forth, but on my far left is Randolph Corbitt, and he bills himself and is billed as a mortgage fraud victim. He had had a very, very nasty situation develop with properties that he had at one time, and he's self-educated himself at law libraries in terms of the issues for quite a long period of time. He's very, very well informed. We've done programming in the past, and Randolph, welcome very, very much.
Thank you, Hal. Pleasure to be with you.
Immediate left is an attorney. His name is Freddie Berg, J. Berg, Esquire, and he's an attorney, and he's someone who's taken an interest in these things, particularly sensitive to the issues that relate to some of the least advantaged people within our society, which I take my hat off to you nobly, because so many of the people in your profession are looking out for the interests of those who are rich and powerful, as you well know. And thank you for all that good work. We're going to relate to it. Maybe we have on other occasions talked about your background, Randolph. Maybe we could let Fred talk a little bit about his, just a little brief introduction, born and raised, educated, just a little bit, just to introduce you to the audience. You've not been a guest before. And then we do want to get into a piece of roll-in footage that we'll all take as chapter and verse for discussion the rest of the program. Just a little bit of your own background, if you could.
I was born and raised in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. Educated at Brandeis University. I majored in economics and Russian studies.
Yes.
I studied Russian for 8 years.
You studied the language as well. Yeah, okay.
High school and college. And went back to Pittsburgh, to the University of Pittsburgh Law School. Graduated in 1980, first jobs in the Philadelphia area. Came to New York in '89, and have worked in up here since then. And the last couple of years, I've been doing a lot of housing and rent court cases and litigation, and just working with special needs folks and things of that nature, and also remaining a able-bodied attorney.
Yeah, absolutely. No, really good. You are a scholar. And I think it's fair to say, I think it's a noble term, an autodidact, just somebody who's very interested in learning, and you're very intellectually curious, and it's obvious for a number of conversations we've had over coffee and so forth, and you again have the interests of the folks, as we say, at heart, and that's very, very laudable in these particular times. Yeah. And then for Randolph, we don't have to go through your story. We've done it in the past. And maybe we could, instead of just doing more introduction and so forth, maybe we could set up that we want to put into the program here a piece of footage that appeared in April of this year on 60 Minutes. And it's rather long for us. We usually don't have such long roll-ins, but it's a piece done by the correspondent Scott Pelley. It's all over the internet and that sort of thing. And I'm not sure what the title of it is, but it does have to deal with the mortgages and the mortgage, the loss of documentation and that sort of thing. And I wonder, maybe we could, Josh in the booth, maybe you could set it up. And this was a piece of tape. It's about 13 minutes or so, and we'll all pay attention to that. And then we'll come back and talk about some of the implications of your concerns, and also your concerns as a man of law. And so, Scott, maybe you could set that up, Josh, and roll that tape. Again, it's about 13 minutes, and then pump the sound in here that we can also listen and take it as a touchstone for what we want to talk about for the rest of the hour. But when you get that tape rolling and bring it into the program, we'd appreciate that. Okay? If you could do that.
In the 1930s, we had bread lines. Venture out before dawn today and you'll find mortgage lines. Average Americans hoping to lower their payments to save their homes. banks are filing foreclosure lawsuits by the millions, and in the rush to collect, it appears some financial firms have used phony legal documents to throw people out of their homes. Chris Pendley says he forged 4,000 bogus mortgage documents a day for major U.S. banks. And your previous experience in banking?
None.
If there was a question about whether we're headed for a second housing shock, that was settled last week with news that home prices have fallen a 6th consecutive month. Values are down nearly to the levels of the Great Recession. One thing weighing on the economy is the huge number of foreclosed houses. Many are stuck on the market for a reason that you wouldn't expect. Banks can't find the ownership documents. It's bizarre, but it turns out that Wall Street cut corners when it created those mortgage-backed investments that triggered the financial collapse. Now that banks want to evict people, they're unwinding these exotic investments to find that often the legal documents behind the mortgages aren't there. Caught in a jam of their own making, some companies appear to be resorting to forgery and phony paperwork to throw people down on their luck out of their homes. In the 1930s, we had bread lines. Venture out before dawn in America today, and you'll find mortgage lines. These folks on the street aren't homeless. They slept on the sidewalk because they want to keep their homes. Facing foreclosure, they camped out in January to get in line to beg their bank for lower payments on their mortgage. So many in the country are desperate now that they have to meet in convention centers coast to coast.
We understand people have been here for a day or two.
This was Los Angeles, where 37,000 homeowners gathered. And this was Miami in February, where the worry was visible and shared by 12,000 more. The line went down the block and doubled back twice. Dale DeFreitas lost her job. Now she fears her home is next.
It's very emotional because I just think about I don't want to lose my home. I really don't.
It's your American dream.
It was, and it still is.
Welcome to Dr. Dave's Dream. Welcome, everybody.
These convention center events are put on by the nonprofit Neighborhood Assistance Corporation of America, which helps people figure out what they can afford and then walks them across the hall to bank representatives to ask for lower payments. More than half will get their mortgages adjusted, but the rest discover that they just can't keep their home. And for many, that's when the real surprise comes in. Turns out these banks, which demand borrowers have all of their paperwork just right, these same banks have fouled up their own paperwork to a historic degree.
In my mind, this is an absolute intentional fraud.
Lynn Simoniak is fighting foreclosure, and while trying to save her house, she discovered something we did not know. Back when Wall Street was using algorithms and computers to engineer those disastrous mortgage-backed securities, it appears they didn't want old-fashioned paperwork slowing down the profits. This is back when it was a white-hot, fevered pitch to move as many of these as possible.
When you could make a whole lot of money through securitization, and every other aspect of it could be done electronically, keystrokes. This was the only piece where somebody was supposed to actually go get documents, transfer the documents from one entity to the other. And it looks very much like they just eliminated that step altogether.
Simoniak's mortgage had been bundled with thousands of others into one of those Wall Street securities traded from investor to investor. When the bank took Simoniak to court, it first said that it had lost her documents, including the critical assignment of mortgage, which transfers ownership. But then there was a courthouse surprise. They found all of your paperwork more than a year after they initially said that they had lost it.
Yes.
Did that seem suspicious to you?
Yes, absolutely. And what do you imagine? It fell behind the file cabinet? Where was all of this? We had it, we own it, we lost it, and then more recently, everyone is coming in saying, hey, we found it. Isn't that wonderful?
But what the bank may not have known is Lynn Simoniak is a lawyer and fraud investigator with a specialty in forged documents. She has trained FBI agents. Did you ask for copies of those documents?
Yes.
And what did you find?
When I looked at the assignment of mortgage, and this is the assignment, a copy from my case, I looked at even the date they put in, which was 10/17/2008, was several months after they sued me for foreclosure. So what they were saying to the court was, we sued her in July of 2008, and we acquired this mortgage in October of 2008. It made absolutely no sense.
Curious, she used her legal training to go online and researched 10,000 mortgages.
Then I began to find the strange signatures.
One of the strangest signatures belonged to the bank vice president who'd signed Simoniak's newly discovered mortgage documents. The name is Linda Green, but on thousands of other mortgages, the style of Green's signature changed a lot. And even more remarkable, Simoniak found that Linda Green was vice president of 20 banks.
She's vice
all at the same time.
All within the same week. I mean, this is a very, very active person. And you could.
Where did all those documents come from? We went searching for the Linda Green, and we found her in rural Georgia. She told us she's never been a bank vice president. In 2003, she was a shipping clerk for auto parts when her grandson told her about a job at a company called Docs, D-O-C-X. Docs, once housed here in Alpharetta, Georgia, was a sweatshop for forged mortgage documents.
They were sitting in a room signing their name as fast as they possibly could to any kind of nonsense document that was put in front of them.
Docs and companies like it were recreating missing mortgage assignments for the banks and providing the legally required signatures. Linda Green says she was named a bank vice president by Docs because her name was short and easy to spell. As demand exploded, Docs needed more Linda Greens. So you're Linda Green?
Yes. Can't you tell?
Chris Pendley worked at Docs at the same time as Linda Green. When you came in to Docs on your first day, what did they tell you your job was going to be?
That I was going to be signing documents for using someone else's name.
Did you think there was something strange about that in the beginning?
Yeah, it seemed a little strange, but they told us and they repeatedly told us that everything was above board and it was legal.
And your previous experience in banking?
None.
In legal documents?
None.
There really were no requirements for the job.
Correct.
You had to be able to hold a pen.
Hold a pen.
But you were signing these documents as if you were an officer of the bank.
Correct.
How many banks were you vice president of in a given day?
I would guess somewhere around 5 to 6.
What were you getting paid for this?
I'm embarrassed to say. $10 an hour.
$10 an hour, that's not much for a guy who's vice president of 5 banks.
Yeah, I was very underpaid for my status in the companies.
Pendley showed us how he signed mortgage documents as Linda Green. He told us that Docs employees had to sign at least $350 an hour. Pendley estimates that he alone did 4,000 a day. This is also Linda Green. Shawana Kreit worked at Docs and says that she both signed and notarized the mortgage documents. What was the role of the notary?
We were to make sure that everyone on the document was who they said they were and notarized the documents.
But the people who were signing the documents weren't who they said they were.
Right.
So if Chris Pendley was signing for Linda Green, you'd notarize that document?
Yes.
And you were told that was okay?
Yes.
What do you know now?
That it wasn't right.
The real Linda Green didn't want to be interviewed, but she said that some of the bank vice presidents at Docs were high school kids. Their signatures were entered into evidence in untold thousands of foreclosure suits that sent families packing.
So it was a common practice in the last few years to flood the courts with these documents.
And look at some of the junk the courts were flooded with. Sometimes the document mill didn't even bother to fill in the name of the supposed owners. To them, it seemed like a joke.
Instead of the name of the bank here that was acquiring the loan. This one says bogus assignee for intervening assignments. That's who acquired this loan.
This was an actual document that was in litigation?
Yes. And what corporation assigned this loan? A corporation identified as a Bad Beanie. Excuse me, when I saw that, I was just absolutely amazed.
What does that mean, a bad beanie?
It could possibly mean a bad beneficiary. I have no idea what they meant. So here's the same woman, Linda Green, and this time, instead of being a vice president of American Home Mortgage Servicing, she's vice president of a Bad Beanie.
Simoniak says that the banks whose paperwork was handled by the Docks forgery mill included Wells Fargo, HSBC, Deutsche Bank, Citibank, U.S. Bank, and Bank of America. We contacted all of them, and each said that it farmed out its mortgage servicing work to other companies, and it was those mortgage servicing firms that hired Docks. Docks was owned by a company called LPS, a $2 billion firm that calls itself the nation's leading provider of mortgage processing services. LPS told us that when it found out about the phony signatures in 2009, it shut Docks down. The FBI and several states are investigating. There were 1 million foreclosures last year, and there will be another 1 million this year. Those lawsuits are forcing open those bundled mortgage-backed securities that Wall Street cooked up in the mid-2000s, and they're exposing a lack of ownership documents all across the country.
It's astonishing to me that this became as pervasive as a problem that it is.
It got sloppy.
It got very sloppy.
Sheila Bair is one of the government's top banking regulators as chairman of the Federal Deposit Insurance Corporation. You just described it as pervasive.
Yeah, it is pervasive. It absolutely is pervasive. And it was just a matter of cutting corners, not spending enough money, not having any quality controls.
Incompetent banking back then is causing foreclosure ghettos today. Although banks say the courts have been accepting their paperwork, now that's changing as desperate homeowners countersue the banks over the document fiasco. This leaves houses unsold indefinitely, undermining the recovery.
I'm very worried about if this starts getting out of hand, the kind of impact it will have.
These are lawsuits by homeowners who are being foreclosed upon, saying...
Yes, or the process has already been foreclosed on.
Saying, prove it.
Yes, exactly.
Prove that you own this.
Exactly.
How big an issue is that going to be? There are 30,000 today?
I think this litigation could easily get out of control. We would like to get ahead of it. We're already feeling like we're falling behind it.
Chairman Bair thinks rotten mortgage documents are so threatening to the economy that the government should force banks to pay into a massive fund. But you think there needs to be a cleanup fund?
I do.
Just like you would have
a good word for it,
for a natural disaster.
Yes, somewhat like that. Yes, this is one of human making, but yes.
You don't want to give an exact dollar amount for this cleanup fund, but what are we talking about? Is it billions?
It would be, yes, I would assume it would be billions, yes.
Billions of dollars?
Yes, absolutely.
Chairman Bair's proposed cleanup fund would pay homeowners to accept a bank's ownership claim without a lawsuit. She says that this could be cheaper for the banks than trying to recreate the missing documents legitimately and not through the document mills.
I think eventually the bank could prove who owned it, but it would take a lot of time and expense.
You know, none of the major banks were willing to sit down with us and talk to us about this, not even the American Bankers Association.
Sorry to hear that.
Why do you think that is?
They're feeling very defensive now, and so I can only assume that is the reason why they decline.
The banks are defensive because all 50 state attorneys general want to punish them. The states are seeking about $20 billion in damages for what they say is the irresponsible, perhaps criminal way that some mortgage companies handled what is, for most folks, the most important investment of their lives.
Okay, there's a lot of meat there and everything. It's an interesting thing. I thought he did a magnificent job, and it's a really interesting set of circumstances that come as a surprise to a lot of people. Well, that this could be the situation, and the implications of it from a legal perspective, I wonder if they're adequately being addressed by the press or by the general society. What do you think? You've been involved in it.
I don't think that, first of all, the settlement that the 50 state attorney generals is proposing, $20 billion, is adequate. we know that the total loss of equity to homeowners tops $3 trillion.
Oh, $3 trillion. I've seen you talk with Raja.
Yes, trillion.
Seeing 16 trillion.
Okay, and that's the amount of money that the Federal Reserve and the Treasury actually gave to the banks, was $16 trillion.
Yeah.
Because there was some money that was given to them above board, and there were billions and trillions given to them behind the backs of the American public, that we, the public, didn't know until maybe, I believe it came out 2 months ago, that they were able to go to the Federal Reserve and the Treasury and get money that was never disclosed to the public.
What about the facts of the matter that they just in this cyber age did not pay attention to? This becomes a legal issue, perhaps. I don't know. Citizens want to understand, but they have papers that are important in terms legally, in order for someone, a bank or let's say a board or something, coming to you and saying, we have these papers that give us permission to tell you that you must pay us the loan, and that document seems to have been lost in the shuffle in so many cases, and that's such an incredible situation. And doesn't it put the onus on the banks rather than the people who are being thrown out of their houses?
There's another issue that people are not paying attention to. One of the reasons that the bank is alleging that the people owe them is because of pieces of paper. There's no proof that the bank ever gave the money to the people who signed those documents.
Well, when you get into a fiduciary, when you get into a
so if you didn't get the money, then there was no legal contract. But I can bring you plenty of people who never got a dime and still got their homes taken. Also, the lady I told you about, $600,000 here in Jamaica, Queens, that she went to a closing and they allegedly got her $600,000. The lady never got a dime, went to court, and Countrywide, I believe it was, still took her property. And one of the issues was the assignment, because from the examination of the date, the assignment was made after the foreclosure start. The law says you have to be owner in possession of the property or the documents in order to start. It's just not happening.
Yeah, I understand. That's a wrinkle, and also Raja, again, who we're going to be doing seminars with on this issue and so forth. If you do a forensic investigation, that a lot can be hidden in terms of the way the legal system is set up, and also the banking, of course, offshore banking and all sorts of things. But if you do, you can get down to what actually happened and do a forensic examination of that. You can see that it was there 30 times. They would have 30 different loans on the same property and that sort of thing. And that when you follow through with trust, understanding the structure of trusts and so forth, that it was, well, it was fraudulent. And it was fraudulent, which is another issue. But back to this primary issue of, in the legal system, there are certain, did you note they said all the people had to have their paperwork, every jot and tittle perfect.
Yes.
Everything had to be perfect. But now the bank comes with this massive thing where they say, we don't have the document. Is it not possible, somebody named John Stewart, who's presenting, that if a person in a legal thing, in a legal setting, where you're being, the money is involved and so on, they have to have your papers in order, and they don't have their papers in order. There's a site that says, show us the paper that says we have an obligation to you, and they can't come up with it. Does it bring up any questions in terms of the law?
Let me just answer it.
No, wait a minute. Let me pose it. Does it bring up any questions of what we call, when you're in a legal situation, standing or a position in terms of one of the two people that are involved in a litigation within the legal system or not?
Well, yes. I mean, the black and white answer is yes.
Okay.
That clearly, if a lender is trying to collect, they have to have direct evidence, the most direct evidence available of the debt and the obligation.
The proper
right,
evidence.
And it has to be substantiated in court through rules of evidence. So on a bearer instrument like that, the most efficient piece of evidence is the note itself.
Okay.
And to the extent that the original can be produced, it should be, no question.
Is it necessary?
Yes.
What I'm saying, in order for the plaintiff or whoever
in a civil action, if the original note can't can't be found, or
yes.
and the reason is accepted as justified. I would imagine that other evidence can be presented of the obligation, an entry made of the note being obtained, information about why it was lost, perhaps a catastrophic event occurred, a fire or a flood, or an electronic error happened that it got eliminated somehow. But clearly, if you're trying to collect money, the best way is to have the best evidence of that is the loan note.
Right. Well,
so, I just want to also comment that I thought that piece was excellent, and I hadn't seen it before, but that is, and it was good that it was such a glaring example of the fraud that's occurred. But I have seen other, examples of, where there has been patternistic fraud, where you have evidence of one financial entity just using preying tactics on customers, sending out or one of these intermediaries sending out mortgage specialists to go suddenly tell people they need second, third, fourth mortgages. People going around to community events, sending quote salesmen out, to try to get people to put more mortgages on their house. So there's other examples, but the evidentiary one, the documentary one, is really crucial. Because that's always the key item.
And there's some again with a forensic investigation, you find that they were trying to get people that they knew they were not going to be able to meet the terms of the loan, because the bundling and the process by which they did it, they were making money on it no matter what. Either way, it's a malpractice or something on the part of banking, and apparently it was consciously understood that way. I mean, that's an issue. But back again to this fundamental thing of, you come into the thing, you don't have the note. Why are so many of the people on the defensive against the bank, which, if I understand it, as you say, black and white. There's going to be nuance. There's going to be corruption. There's going to be, we bailed out all the banks, giving them $16 trillion and so forth, but they're coming on so aggressively and throwing people out, but and yet they are doing that with documentation or with a legal structure. They would have to, if it was sticking up for the way the legal understanding is, that they do not have a position or standing. Is that not relevant in terms of the beginning get-go situation in the court? How do they finesse it and get away with it if they're getting away with it? Universally, it seems, across the country.
These kinds of errors, if admitted, are revealing not just of a benign mistake, of like I said, of a, perhaps, after, some research and, a rational, reason and rational excuse being given, because when you get to this level of fraud, you get into issues of scienter from both a civil scienter.
What does that mean?
It means motive plus, I guess, is the best way to describe that. In other words, there's a motive to avoid the obligations, the legal obligations the lender has, as well as a pattern to, of it occurring over several instances.
Systemic.
Systemic,
It would be systemic in an intellectual sense,
Right. Or in a courtroom setting. And, a courtroom is a laboratory of truth finding and fact finding. So, that's what, a case like this would reveal, where there's, where fraud comes out like this.
And then also, if there were two people involved in a situation and they both agreed that they would like to come to terms, like it might be a problem on the seller side, who doesn't have a document they need to do, but if they were in agreement that they were going to make an agreement, then they could do something that in that idiosyncratic way could take care of that, because they both agree. So they would come up with something and say contractually, we agree. But if it was somebody being thrown out and it was confrontational, would not a lot of people been able to have a plaintiff's position in terms of suing the banks for having taken money from them when they did? Now, is that possible, or is that a dream of justice that has always been denied to people and so forth? Is being denied to them by the banks and the system overriding that common knowledge understanding of what ought to happen?
you know, I could see some people saying, you know, reasonably saying that, you know, this whole kind of, you know, all of the, in fact, you know, I would imagine, and maybe your experience was this, that there were many court proceedings over the missing notes, you know, and that wastes a lot of people's time. It also takes attention away from what the reasons were behind the missingness of the note.
Well, that could be seen in,
so, you know, it's it covers up the fraud in a way.
Well, fraud is one thing, or also it could be that things are so speeded up that the system, it's interesting with cyber, things are moving so quickly now. It took a few thousand years to get over feudalism by the industrialization process that was coming along. Now we're coming into a time where the world is being transformed so quickly and so forth that the whole thing is like a quickening within pregnancy or something. So it's a systemic thing of the whole. You could present that design question to the political and or the leadership of the world that's beginning to be manifest in what we call Occupy Wall Street, that the design of the world system was not adequate to what was required for an elementally changed and adjust in evolutionary appropriate way for the whole human condition, if you understand. It was a lack of political vision and so forth by the people, and they're reifying outdated institutions and assumptions. Like out of feudalism, where are the assize courts? Where are the powdered wigs that we're used to? And we're, you know, that kind of thing. Do you understand what I'm saying?
I think so.
So that it would be a systemic design that is applying to the whole world order that is finding expression in what we call Occupy Wall Street, which is going horizontal and saying there's something at a systemic level.
See,
you understand? Maybe that's getting into intellectual.
I give you my honest, you know,
yeah,
and
please.
it's, you know, it's partially based on my you know, study of economics.
Yeah.
You know, money is a medium of exchange.
Yes.
And you know, what. You know, I realize there's the banks, you know, are the scoundrels here. You know, but other times when I got a loan from my co-op, you know, I loved my bank, and I bragged to my friends that I got a loan from this bank, and you know,
Jimmy Stewart savings
exactly, but
the good
you know, but so I'm just I haven't seen, although you know I have seen some changes just recently in the last year, 2 years, in other you know financial institutions coming forward to offer you know different types of services and give you more. You know, I'm talking about credit unions and other. You know, a few of them are even trying to mimic. I think what I knew. You know, I was born in '55, so I grew up in this post-World War II era, suburban. You know, kind of life, and we had savings and loans association.
Yeah, right,
that's where our, you know, right, and that's where our mortgage was in our home. You know, it was. So I always knew that you know, mom or dad had to go to the bank to go to the savings and loan to make a payment.
Right.
You know, we sat in the car. And waited for them to run in and do that. You know,
and there's a place for it. And you don't want the banking. You would not want the banking enterprise by which we can get investment that's going to be able to advance the human condition and so forth to be decimated. We wouldn't want that. You need to have it. But that there's something rotten in Denmark, United States, and other parts of the world vis-a-vis the folks. And the people who have benefited from this with their swaps and derivatives and their fancy, their algorithmic kind of manipulation of things can be brought. And they seem not to, nobody that I know of from the banking industry has been prosecuted for the crimes that were theirs. If you understand, if it is crime, or just say mistakes.
Okay, Howard, it's not mistakes. You know, this was systematically planned to come to this conclusion where the banks were going to be bailed out. Understand that when they bundle those things, we know from those films that they had the ability to pick up what they call a credit default swap, which we know is an insurance, okay? They bet 30 times on one that it was going to fail. They also knew when they took the fees, AIG took those fees, that they were never going to be able to pay the customers if they defaulted. So they knew that the only person they could get the money from was was the Treasury. That was all planned and laid out so that it would happen. It was no accident that these notes have been destroyed. It was no accident they've gone out and...
Well, that's another layer of
but it's also it's no accident that they went into communities and wrote mortgages that they knew the people couldn't pay because the thing was they wanted it to default.
Did they want to cash in on the insurance or the reinsurance of the derivatives?
They did both. They cashed in on the insurance and then foreclosed on the people.
Yeah.
Took their property and then put it back on the market.
And they could tear it down.
And they were making money on fees. They were making money on fees. They were making money on insurance. They were making money on taking the people's property. They were making money on reselling the people's homes.
Yeah,
and the idea that they lost the notes, to me, is incredible. Millions of them? Absolutely millions of us?
You can understand it.
No, I cannot understand
that. Okay, well, that's another twist.
I am very sympathetic about that. Even, I've always been the kind of lawyer that says, never be your own lawyer. So when I did buy a co-op here in New York City, I hired a lawyer, and I used a lawyer when I sold it too. And I had the same reaction, like I said, and even though I have a professional education and experience, I was in the same aghast way that these little errors made. When I sold it, there was something that cost me $140 just because someone forgot to read something, and came out and they said that's $140 less for you, Fred. And at the time, I was getting a big sale, the market was up. I didn't worry about it, but now I would really, I could see someone balking at $140. That's a lot of money to miss for just because someone forgot to read a paragraph. And I think you have a lot lot of people who are
look at that multiplied by 12 million people. 12 million people.
To hear that some document was, was
and also let me say the part that we forgot to pay attention to. They said LPS. Okay, that was a long process. So their job was to create phony documents. Any document that was that they couldn't, the judges or the lawyers couldn't present in court, they just simply went to them, they created the document and then brought it back to the court. It was all part of the plan.
That's
$1 billion. They just said they made $2 billion creating phony documents.
This is an onion that peels and peels and peels, and I'm thinking maybe we ought to think about not only doing this hour, but doing another hour on this. If you think you could add, maybe we should do that. But I just aired.
What about the rocket docket we talked about?
A program on Monday when this program will air, and it was with the executive director of, at that time, the International Swaps and Derivatives Association. That's the major association that all the major players in the world are associated with, and this derivatives thing has come in more recently, only in about the last 20 years or so. But go ahead, sure, by all means.
Something here. Well, two things, if I may. One, just on the word documents, how many times I get rightfully chastised, I'll use the word chastised, by a judge or a colleague lawyer talking about what is the problem with your document, where's your documents, and we're all educated that way growing up, Secondly, I want to say from the economist point of view, there are people, I think, on the other side who would say these credit swaps and all these other fancy market derivatives, securities and everything, this was capital creation. They were doing this in the name of the free market economy. They were generating capital, they were the fees and everything. We were all blind to that. So we're not blind, but we're just that's sophisticated.
That's how they operate in the dark, because we didn't know. But the knowledge is coming forth now, and we're now saying, no, this is not exotic. You simply were playing a shell game with us.
Well, we did.
That's exactly what it is. Sometimes what happens through litigation, this is what I would hope that the judicial system does, judicial branch of our great country, is to reveal things. And one thing that has occurred with all these foreclosure litigations, I mean, I heard about these cases in Florida 2 or 3 years ago. Unbelievable stuff, shocking stuff. And the way that some of the news articles had to go into such detail to reveal it. It's like listen, when you shine light on a problem, the truth always comes out. And this was just so revealing of, here we were looking at people who, I mean, these people what I would chat up in the coffee shop, and say, how you doing, what do you do, what's your job, where are you from, and here this guy was saying he was signing 400 pieces of paper.
Yeah.
An hour. I mean, that's not fathomable.
I know.
At some point.
I think it would be good to try and think of it in systemic terms. I think a systemic thing is even more worrisome than we did get one person, Mr. Madoff, was called a Ponzi scheme creator, and so forth. And they put all the attention on him.
It was just shocking.
So that was there, but it's systemic. And I think that thing about derivatives, I don't know. That's relatively new in the modern experience. It's only in the last 30 years or so. About the time that Mr. Reagan and company and Friedman and so forth came along in terms of economic theory, and all of that derivatives association. We did the program. A lovely lady, Carolyn Jackson. She was the executive director. It was just getting up.
Sure.
It's now huge. Everybody, and I know a number of banker friends.
And look how people had to
do we understand
educated in the vernacular of these.
In the largest sense,
it got to be where it defied the laws of physics to understand in a way. But what it was essentially, it went back to, as she said to me, it went back to we had Lloyd's of London. It's a reinsuring situation, and it's one that properly, and seen in a certain sense, it's worth you bringing up economic theory. It's worthwhile. Properly, it deals with that which is in the inherent in the business of in business of risk. There's risk in terms of investment that's going to be made. Let's say the logic of a business finance, you're going to make an investment in something. You sold dresses. You're going to make an investment in something that's going to pay for itself over a relative period of time in the future. If not, it's a bad business investment. So there is risk. And there's very levels of risk that are involved. But it's essentially a reinsuring capability. And bankers I know, if they did not have, or let's say currency fluctuations, unforeseen things, if you didn't have a derivatives clause in a banking contract, $100 million water project or something, you didn't have a derivatives clause for unforeseen things, you'd be sued for malpractice. So derivatives have a place, but it should be, in my assumption, it should be within the government.
Okay, but they operate a little bit different.
And this was all private sector, self-regulated, private sector, self-regulating. She even said there's no regulation of it. And so what you had is reinsuring against loss for the insurance function that is part of the business contract and so forth, but it made it possible for those guys who did it 30 times and that's $16 trillion was being paid from derivatives contracts that were made.
The way I understand it, it's a little
different. Do you understand?
Yeah.
So that should have been within the government. That should have been within the government. And that's something we probably lack in terms of our overall structure.
Basically, the way that most times derivatives work in taking out the risk. For example,
reinsurance.
I'm a farmer.
Reinsurance.
I grow rice. Okay. You are a warehouse guy, okay? So I say to you, look, if you lend me some money, when my crop comes in, what I will do is I'll give you this rice sometime in the future at X amount of dollar. And that minimizes my risk as a farmer because I have a guaranteed market. Then the risk then comes back to me in the event that, let's say, I sold it to you at $2. What happens if there is a drastic drought and the price of that rice goes all the way up to 25? Then I have taken that risk, and so that's why they use it in that manner as a hedge against the
Yes, right, and that's something that's legitimately wanted to be dealt with. That would be dealt with.
But the credit default swap wasn't about a hedge. It was about illegally insuring something that you did not own many times more than if it were absolutely insurance would have been legally allowed.
Well,
you could have only insured it one time if you owned it. But with the credit default swaps, and that's why they played the game with the word, and instead of calling it insurance, they call it a credit default swap, because so they could get around the legal requirements of insurance.
I'm hearing you, but what I'm trying to say to you, if I could, right? Carolyn, lovely lady, she said that thing got started in Periclean, Greece. It was a bet against the olive crop. So it's like that, and it's reinsurance, and you have an insurance industry that can deal, like commodity insurance, with the various levels of risk within the economic order. There's various levels of risk.
Insurance is different than credit default swaps.
No, well, the credit default swaps is
different than insurance, because insurance, you have a superintendent of insurance, and that you have to legally meet certain requirements in order to call it insurance. And also, in insurance, he has a car, he can insure his car.
Yeah, right.
Okay, if he has a car, and I'll now call it a bus, let's say outside of a legal terminology, so then I can go buy a credit default swap, and you can buy one on his car, and I can buy one on his car, and they can buy one on his car, and 30 people can buy one on his car.
Okay.
So when his car breaks down, 30 people are coming to ask him, the insurance company, pay me for my claim. They couldn't do it. They were AIG. AIG overextended itself, and everyone knew it. They were selling credit default swaps for $3 trillion. They nowhere had the money. And not only that, in the use of credit default swaps, they did not have to put aside reserves, which is a requirement during the insurance, so in case you did have a claim. It was all laid out and designed to make sure. So when the 30 claims came, the only person that could pay for it was the government, and they had designed to go to the government and say, listen, we can't pay these people. All was set out and planned. It was not
all well and good, all well and understand, all well and understood, and we understand legally and fraud or whatever you want to do, and run amok, Friedmanite, run amok, perhaps, if you want to think of that. It was post-Reagan. It was that kind of thing. That's part of the political context. What I'm trying to get at is part of a larger design question in terms of how are we going to operate the human society. We don't have, and the thing is, there is a place for insurance for various levels of risk in living or in investment or in anything else, and there ought to be a legitimate. Now insurance exists.
Legitimate insurance.
Lords of London, they have
legitimate insurance.
And I shouldn't say there's insurance against risk. Okay, and that should be that can be included in the business model or in
your cost factor,
in the intellectual model of understanding the design by which we're going to do things. Then there ought to be a legitimate place for reinsuring the insurance industry that gives it the ability to be able to get contracts that can be well worked out with the various levels of risk in the economic order. Not everything is a crapshoot. Not everything is very risky. That's venture. There's venture, but you don't turn the whole thing into.
But if you don't have the capital, to back the policies, then you should not write them. Okay?
Well, okay, that's
you should not write them if you cannot back them. You should not write them and then come back to me, the taxpayer, and say, "But listen, I line my pockets, and now these claims are coming in, and I want you, the government, to bail me out."
But what's happened is the government has done that.
The government was part of it. It was a part of the plan, in my personal opinion.
That gets into a larger order. Yes. We touched upon the thing that's in the zeitgeist now called Occupy Wall Street.
Okay.
It's going everywhere in the world, is it not?
Absolutely. I've been down there 7 times myself.
Something wrong at the level of design. Okay? I'm looking at design. I'm trying to get, there's something not only rotten in Denmark, there's something rotten and out of date with the way planet Earth is being operated. And it begins to get down to where you look at one of the issues to look at is how are we going to distribute, you did economics. We could talk a little about that. Supply and demand.
There's a concept.
We have a problem now that the people do not have the demand, and they don't have a way of having income in the hands of the people to clear the market of what can be produced in a technologically oriented system. A major problem. There's not going to be the ability to buy what can be produced.
Well, that's what they wanted.
No. You see, you're trying to nab the bad guys.
The 1% designed it to say that if I can take from you almost all your wealth, I can then offer you anything, and you are so hobbled that you will take it.
Yeah.
That's not about a system that is equitable distribution.
And
they never wanted that. And from 1929 to 1979, we had a decent level of prosperity here in this country.
Yeah.
When Reagan became president and Bill Clinton instituted his partnership with America, the first thing they said was the reason for these new regulations was they felt that the minority communities didn't own enough homes, and that's what it was for. Well, if that was the issue, why didn't you address the issue of redlining?
Well, then that
was the cause of the issue of the disparity. You didn't have to go there and talk about all these. You could have simply addressed the issue of the responsibility of the banks in those communities where they had deposits. They didn't. They chose to create this system so they could make themselves money.
Okay,
it had nothing to do with the people.
I understand, and that's the thing that's what we're talking about. It really is.
Yes.
It's a political question. It's a political finding out who the bad guys are. That's what James Joyce had Daedalus say. History is a nightmare of injustice.
Absolutely.
From which we're attempting to awaken. What I'm trying to get at is the terms by which we might awaken from a historical context that has always been unjust, with the rich and powerful taking advantage of those who are not. No?
Okay, but I also say that once upon a time, the fact that they took advantage of people also was the fact of the level of understanding of the people. Today, more of us, ordinary citizens, understand the mechanisms and
look at this autodidactically.
Am I right? We understand more today than I know more than my parents do. Yeah. I know enough to go to court and challenge them on their turf.
Tell my parents they took his pride. Tell Fred. The audience will know. Did you know his background? I mean, he had his property taken away from him. He was homeless
and fully paid.
He lived for 5 years on the E-train. He would get up and take a shower, the public shower. He would go, he would get straightened up and everything. And you know where he went every day? A law library, and taught himself. So he knows of which he talked. That's called autodidact rather than educating. And people are getting educated to that. And that's the basis at a level.
That's exactly what I'm saying.
Occupy the world.
We know more now than we ever did.
So I'm trying to get to those larger issues that may be blown in the wind.
There's an economics concept called comparative advantage, which says that if like one country can produce a product or service cheaper than another country, that we should, and I think that applies to organizational dynamics as well. If one sector can produce, for example, when the economy was good, and there was generally what's called the middle class, the working class, was doing okay. This whole credit swap industry was existing. It started without a whole lot of scrutiny. They were self-regulated. That no one knew about.
No,
it was a Wall Street function. Wall Street to a lot of people.
What period of time are you talking about? Since the Second World War or something? No, it wasn't. It didn't come into being until
after 79.
After 79, 95, they were just getting started. It was Reagan. The Reagan
there was actually, since, I guess really, and I think it predates even Reagan, you could say, but there has been a march to marketizing everything in American life. Someone commented to me the other day that's something about bail or indictment issue is being marketed somehow. But there's a market for
everything. For any debt can be
this is not just this is not just limited to homeowners and people or possible homeowners. We have
cars, student loans.
We have people. It crosses the generations.
Yeah, it does.
And it changes your mindset, your outlook about the future, about raising a family, about taking care of yourself. Even. If you think that you're walking around with $100,000, $200,000 in loans because you managed to, get an education, and it's like it just creates a different attitude about, for people and how I've seen it. It's some clients and friends, really suffering, and victimized because it makes you those kinds of having those kinds of assets or liabilities facing you as an individual or as a couple, with children and everything. It gives you a whole different set of values about what things to give priorities to in life.
It affects you mentally and health-wise.
Absolutely.
And the family.
About the health-wise. Because public health has been, honestly, has been suffering.
Absolutely. And can we agree that there is a level of anxiety across the world that is I don't know, I think it must be just unprecedented in terms of the the frustration has blown the top
with people, and people are frustrated. But don't forget, we also, we grew up, we live here in the U.S. and we have, we think the rest of the world. There are, if you really do a studied approach in Africa, South America, even within the, our USA, our United States, there are people who, I mean, sometimes they call it microeconomic, or something. There's, I don't know whether it's communities, there's loan, these kind of loan agencies and borrowing agencies that people use. Some of them aren't appreciated by, people. They think they might have,
the microeconomic program.
Maybe these are new models that we need to take a look at, more seriously, as well as, just, listen, there's a sense of renewal that happens from scrutinizing and, from revealing the, major problems that hurt a lot of people and scrutinizing it and breathing new life into it.
Yeah. And the ultimate challenge would be something that could be very all-inclusive, including those who are responsible for the immediate situation, and his anger.
Oh yeah,
and the anger that is there at, let's just say, the banks.
Well, not only
they've taken all that money and they've gotten away with nothing.
But also, the anger is also the angry at the system. Because if I go to court and I show the judge where these documents were created as a result of false index numbers, which I showed them, and nothing happens, and you stand right there to this lawyer saying, look, this debt is legitimate, and you say, no, this debt is not. Look at the documents, okay? Yeah. And you see the flaws because, the CPLR, the CPLR gives you a definition of what it has to be a legitimate document. So you read them and you think, and and you're looking at the judge, you stand there like, but this is a fake document.
Yeah, and these issues, it seems to me, if I may, one of the major things in the United States economy has been housing. That's the way most people have gotten some work into their life. Otherwise, it's such a major issue. It's impacting. It comes out in this. It brings up all kinds of issues. Now, let's talk in terms of
not just housing.
No, we got housekeeping to deal with right now. Okay, and that is that this brings up so many issues that we're touching on and so forth. Gentlemen, we were sitting down for 1 hour. I would suggest that we might continue this on. You got the juice for that?
Absolutely.
So that we'll make this the first of 2 programs that'll air this week, okay? So we'll take these, we'll come back for a second hour where we'll pick up from this one and everything, because that really does set off a whole lot of thinking about Occupy. We're supposed to be doing a program with Danny Schechter about Occupy Wall Street, but we're laying the groundwork for maybe giving real clout to the Occupy Wall Street vibe that's abroad in the world in a way that could be resonating not only with saving the people who made mistakes and are being bailed out and still going on doing their thing, rather than having any for the people.
Yes.
And that would be something that would be worthy of, because there's something needed to be added to leaven this thing in the interest of the people at a systems level. And so it might be well
worth
I think
I just want to mention, I think you would have...
I'm sorry I'm rattling on, but I really think because it's not just housing. It goes into everything.
A couple of points. First of all, not just housing gives people a sense of security, but their pensions, and even people who...
Health, as you said.
And health, but so I've noticed that, honestly, I've seen some pension transfers where a pension plan has put money, they seem to be moving more into Social Security because they feel the government can guarantee it better than the pension plan. I don't know.
Well,
and secondly, I just want to mention one thing for the further, that could be a topic of another.
Keep rounding up. We got about 20 seconds.
I just want to say that some of these people that are, these mortgage people, some of them need compassion. To get involved in a pathology like this, where a man's said, I've been lying on 400 documents an hour.
That's going to catch up with you, like Scrooge.
Okay, but the greater problem...
Listen, I'm sorry, we got another hour. We got another hour. We're going to deal with these things, but we're running out of time. We got the tyranny of the clock. It's running down. So let's just remind those in the audience, your pleasure to have here Randolph Corbitt, and he's a mortgage fraud victim, and Freddie J. Berg, Esquire, attorney law. We're talking about the situation that led up to the Occupy Wall Street moment in this world, and so we're doing that now. Thank you very much. We'll be coming back with another hour of this further in this week, but thank you very much, gentlemen. Thank you very much. We'll be coming.
Thank you, Harold, for having us.
Another hour.
Thank you.